Welcome to Capacity Building with the Acosta Institute. I'm excited to be here with my dear colleague, Maria Tan. I'm Dr. Angel Acosta, one of your co-hosts. Our dear Jason McDaniel will be joining us today. But today we will be exploring and discussing, thinking about healing-centered business as a paradigm and kind of exploring some principles, some anecdotes, some stories around that work that we've been doing at the Acosta Institute through our public programming, but also our consulting of organizations. And Maria, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be recording this episode with you about business. It's something that we talk about a lot between the two of us and behind the scenes. So I'm excited to see what will emerge in this public dialogue.
Yeah, I figured we could begin exploring some of the stories that are important to us in regards to our journey to entrepreneurship. I actually, what brought me to entrepreneurship and to business is, and this happens to me a lot, that the thing that I hated ends up being kind of like a life calling. Like, for example, early on in my education, I remember vividly in middle school, in high school, hating getting to the critical thinking question of either homework assignments or reading assignments. There would be like this critical thinking section. I used to be like, oh my God, I hate this. And, I ended up getting a doctorate where I spent 5 years researching and engaging in profound critical thinking and in a way becoming a public intellectual, where I think critically in public in a way. And the same thing goes for my journey with business. My parents, coming from Dominican Republic in New York, finding a base in New York, they were very entrepreneurial in a way, in restaurants, in the restaurant business, and in the grocery store business. So we grew up working in restaurants with my parents, working in what are called bodegas, grocery stores in New York. But I hated that. I hated that work. I hated, not only because I was just like, I just didn't want to work as a child or as a young, as a youth. But I've worked since I was 8 years old, right up until college and beyond, in a whole variety of different roles. And the idea of running a business was just, I just did not want to do that. I didn't want to run a business. I didn't want to work. And it's funny that now, all that resistance, it led to me, running my own business. So, but that's kind of just a more personal journey work. I come out of the field of education, and I spent 8 years working in a nonprofit, traveling the country, helping schools prepare students to get to college. So the nonprofit model was really more where I felt most comfortable after getting my undergraduate degree in anthropology and then my master's degree in leadership studies. And it wasn't until I got to a point in that part of my career that I wanted to do more. And business wasn't even the move. The move at the time was to get more education, to go get a doctorate and maybe do research or impact policy. I really wanted to transform and support the education in a significant way and think about mindfulness, think about social justice, and which led to a focus on healing-centered education. And it just so happened that when I started my doctorate program at Columbia University, a teacher's college, in 2015, I did 5 years of intense research. And when I graduated in 2020, the pandemic hit and there were no jobs. There were no jobs. There was no real way for me to materialize my 5-year journey and get a job, get a tenure track position. So kind of I was forced to kind of be creative. And even though I was doing independent kind of contracting before that, I basically built a business around my dissertation, which became the Acosta Institute. And we've been in business for about 5 years. So it's kind of like my journey, getting to this point of really standing firm and tall with my identity as a business person, especially a for purpose and a purpose driven business person.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that personal story. Um, yeah, I can relate in a lot of ways. I have been saying recently that I came into business by accident because my career also started in education, and I was a public school teacher in New York, and I would meet so many people in the city that were entrepreneurs, networking, friends. And I did not believe in entrepreneurship. I was like, no, that's you just have a lot of interests and you just like to do a lot of things. So you're just calling yourself an entrepreneur. But then I found myself in my school having this entrepreneurial spirit of starting different initiatives and endeavors and passion projects within the school to serve the different communities within my classroom. And when the pandemic hit, I realized that I wanted to serve in a different way. And the school that I was at didn't quite have the capacity to hold what I was trying to do, which was mindfulness in the classroom, restorative justice in the classroom. So I left. And when I left the classroom, I took all of the momentum and the projects I was working on, and I just started doing it on my own. And eventually it came to a point where I was being asked to teach at different organizations or speak. And then I LLC'd myself and my business, which is House of Thriving. So I had no intention of becoming a business person at all. I didn't believe in entrepreneurship. But what was clear for me was that I knew who I wanted to serve and how I wanted to serve. And that's such an important piece of being in business. And then tying it to the personal piece, at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I started to reconnect with my maternal grandmother, who was a businesswoman in the Philippines. She was a very successful fashion designer and seamstress, and she had amazing business acumen. So I learned from and through her. And I think for both of us in our stories, what I'm hearing is that generationally or intergenerationally, there's this spirit that wants to come through, this spirit and this lineage of serving and being in business that wants to come through both of us, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And your grandmother definitely is felt, when it comes to seeing you grow, and watching you kind of explore your entrepreneurial side. I think it would be useful to kind of explore a little bit around this idea of healing centered business. What is healing centered business? Is there such a thing as healing centered business? I think it's helpful for the community listening that was a similar question that I asked in my doctoral research. The question that I asked there was, what is healing centered education? Is there such a thing as healing centered pedagogies? And I think just organically over the last 5 years, we've begun to think about and to move into, like, is healing centered business possible? What are healing centered approaches to business? So just want to kind of invite people to kind of connect to that rich question that we tend to ask, and now applying it to the business world. I'll say a couple things. First, one is, as we were doing and developing healing centered education offerings, like summits, workshops, courses, and then consulting, over the last 5 years, we were also running a business. And what I noticed was that some of the ways that we would teach using of mindfulness, using of social emotional learning, somatic practices, and other healing centered practices, I also noticed that it also impacted how we used to work with each other and how we would treat each other in the internal team and how we would manage the business itself. So I kind of asked, I was like, well, it seems like we're running a healing centered business. So what is that? What is that? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What is that? So I wanted to let the community know that this comes out of like real personal and internal transformation and work. The healing, what we would potentially call like the healing centered paradigm in business is nothing new. In fact, it's related to a variety of other movements in the business world. So, for example, most prominently, like in the environmental sector, like the ways in which climate change has created a lot of challenges for the business community and the world in general, but attempts to have environmental responsibility as a core business practice is part of the healing centered paradigm. The corporate social responsibility as a way of integrating into business as a commitment to being connected to and responsive to community needs is part of the healing centered business paradigm. The diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though right now in this current political moment is being attacked and in many ways squashed by the current administration, is part of the healing centered movement. So DEI is part of the healing centered movement in business. And also the integration of social emotional learning in CEO and management development. And so all that to say is that healing centered business is nothing new. It just kind of, at this point in our work, using that kind of language allows us to more precisely name this commitment to things like slow work, this commitment to engaging in planning for your business in a way that accounts for your well-being, that accounts for a team's well-being, and really being attuned to that. So just some grinding around like this idea of the business, a healing centered business paradigm, and how it's connected to other movements in the business world. For example, like the B corporations and the for business, the for profit, the for purpose business model, where organizations are structured in a way to increase their impact in communities. That's all part of kind of the healing centered movement in business. So just wanted to kind of like give a little bit of color to that as far as like where it comes from, what it's connected to. And I think it would be really good too to discuss a little bit about what does that mean for practice, and what does healing centered business look like in practice. And there are a few pillars that we have from our work. One of them is mindfulness and reflection. So integrating mindfulness very intentionally into how we engage in strategic planning, working with clients, working with designing our offerings for the community. One of your favorites, Maria, taking a relational approach to business. So as opposed to just focusing on transactional relationships where we're trying to, get more clients and obviously focus on revenue, and, a lot of the calculation around who we work with and how we work with them is based on the transactional nature of what we can get from people, rather really focusing on relationships and the quality of those relationships, and building lasting, trusting, community-oriented connections that lead to really robust collaborations. So there's mindfulness, there's reflection, there's um, relational business, or relational approach to business, and then there's another one of your favorites is healing through strategy. Healing through strategy, that the very way that you execute not just a strategy, but the way you execute your business accounts for your well-being, and the well-being of your team. Those are just three principles. There are a few more. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for naming at the top about how healing centered business practices are not new. I think that's important, but also what is sort of new from what I've seen, just some statistics that people, uh, customers, consumers now are more willing to buy from businesses that have healing centered values or that are for purpose businesses. Like people want to see, they want to see transparency, they want to see authenticity from businesses that they buy from. Um, so I think that's telling kind of where we're moving as a society. And also it's inviting, I think it invites companies that maybe are not leaning in that direction yet to start to think of what are the healing centered moves that we want to move towards. I think most businesses, at least small businesses like ours, already have that inherent in what they're doing, but maybe it's not clearly articulated or explicitly stated in the way that they present themselves publicly. Yeah, so healing through strategy, I heard you say it really accounts for the well-being of us who are running the business. And I think there's also strategy around reframing traditional business techniques and business strategy in a way that is healing centered. Like, I think that in and of itself is strategy, because a lot of the business education that I come across or that you'll see in mainstream business education is not catered towards that. So we almost have to do the work of translating it. I think it comes very naturally for us because we operate in healing centered ways. It's almost impossible for me not to. So I think it comes naturally to us, but I think that translation is a strategy itself. So an example of that is in business, they'll often talk about when you're selling a product or a service, you're selling an identity. Like, people want to buy into an identity. They will pay money to receive a service or a product that helps them become or fit into an identity that they see for themselves. And that always sat kind of weird with me. Just the phrase selling an identity just always sat strangely with me. So when I go to reframe that, I think of it as we're not selling someone an identity because we don't need to, but we're supporting someone in their journey of becoming, because we're also always becoming. And not in this weird, striving way, but in a way that supports someone's wholeness and authenticity and coming back home to themselves. So that's what I think about healing through strategy.
No, yeah, I think that's a really powerful framing around framing one's business and one's offerings as an invitation to help people become something that's in relation to obviously the product that you're selling. I think there's also this other framing too that's connected, because so often the advice from a marketing standpoint is to be clear around the problem you're trying to solve, the problem that your business is trying to solve for a customer or a client or an organization. And just reminds me of so many different trainings that I've gone to in relation to my business education, not a formal business education, but just more like in workshops. And one of the most profound insights is that sometimes when you have a problem, in your business, obviously there are material solutions, right? There are material solutions that you need to like fix it. There's oftentimes more capital, more money. But one of the big insights is that actually is an identity shift. There may be some concrete skills, but some mindset shifts that are required for you to be able to even shift the problem. I think it reminds me a lot of Einstein's quote around like, you can't solve a problem within and with the same consciousness that created it or was embedded in it, So there's something really powerful there about inviting people to become something in relation to also solving a particular problem. And there's so many little small, like the relational approach. I think it's really big. I think it's enormous when people, that's the feedback we get often in our work, is like, we really appreciate how you hold space, by you, I mean our team. You really appreciate how you deliver the resources, the product with a human touch. And I think that's all relational. It's not just like, oh, you can buy this product or this course or this, summit or, this consulting. But the work we did, for example, with young adults, audience learners, like, I think there was this really a deep appreciation for just how we held it, as opposed to just delivered these lesson plans or these workshops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love when you talk about the relational piece, because you help us discern, or not discern, but, when you talk about business, it's an exchange. It's an exchange of value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the relational piece, that's so important, right? If we're exchanging anything, relationship needs to be at the foundation of it. Otherwise, it is transactional. It's just transactional. So I really appreciate the way that you've continued to frame that for us. I really like to look at the etymology of words. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been doing that a lot recently. And I looked up the word business, and the etymology of the word business actually comes from busyness and anxiety.
Mm.
And I was shocked when I read that, because I was like, how are we going to be out here trying to exchange value or exchange goods on the premise of anxiety and busyness?
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting to me, and perhaps is the root of why, I don't want to say root, but perhaps is one of the reasons why business can be so harmful in our society and in capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this turn towards the relational piece helps us ground back into the exchange of value, the exchange of energy as well, and then also helps us reframe what worth and value is. As someone that is selling something, a product, a service, issues of self-worth can come up, especially if you're a small business owner, if you have your own brand. I think issues of self-worth, especially when it comes to setting a price, that can often be a roadblock to not just getting your work out there, but also like settling into your own self-worth.
Yeah, there's so much here, from some of the conversations that I've had with entrepreneurs that have been, further along in their journeys. Part of what is coming up is this idea that running a business, being in business, may be one of the greatest healing journeys you can be on, because fundamentally it puts you right at the center of making decisions that touch and trigger the most fundamental stories you tell yourself about yourself. So the ways that you communicate with your team, the ways in which you use, move, hold, waste, attract money, all are associated and connected to our previous experiences in our childhood and our adolescence and our previous work experiences. So it is a profound kind of cycle of seeing yourself in the mirror if you're aware enough. If you're aware enough. So this idea of healing through strategy, or more precisely, healing through business, is quite provocative for those of us who want to hold that. Right? It might be a bit too exhausting to heal through your business when there's so many big, like the last thing I want to do at times is think about how I can heal through the execution of my business, and yet having to make these really difficult revenue-based or financial decisions that not only impact me, but impact the team, right? That's the last thing I want to do is like, oh, this is a healing journey. No, that's exhausting. But nevertheless, there's something there that I think could be useful and powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, another word that I recently looked up the etymology for was entrepreneur. And to be an entrepreneur means to take on something, like to take on an endeavor. So when I hear you say that around this idea of being in business and being an entrepreneur, like triggers these core wounds around self-worth. When I think about the etymology of the word, I reframe it as, can I take on the endeavor of committing to myself, committing to this journey of potentially healing these core wounds, committing to this journey of grounding in my self-worth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another way of saying it is, are you about that life?
Yes.
Are you about this life?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much here that we can discuss, I think, and I also want to balance the conversation a little bit because there's a lot of kind of, I think some toxic messaging around business and entrepreneurship. The most obvious is like, cutthroat business strategies, or like, profit driven focus business strategies that just look at the bottom line around revenue. I also think that there are some really slightly dysfunctional ways, at least in American culture, where we obsess over productivity and optimization and efficiency in regards to our time, in regards to how we view relationships, right? So if I'm focused on optimization, efficiency, and productivity, how does that impact how I approach a relationship? Relationships with colleagues, friends, clients. I'll be probably looking always at the time, always looking at the output, always looking at the transaction. And just right now, looking at social media, looking at, the pressures that are on the economy for small businesses, there is this kind of desire to engage in optimization, productivity, peak performance. And that's all great. Like I love the language of peak performance, even productivity, efficiency, and I think we need that. We need that. But we are not robots. We are not computers. As much as artificial intelligence is augmenting a lot of our capabilities, we are more than binary code. So that's why I like to play with, let's say, peak performance. What does healing centered peak performance look like? Efficiency. What does efficiency look like? What efficiency look like within a healing through strategy? Productivity. What does productivity look like in relation to slow work? Right. And a great book just came out by Cal Newport called Slow Productivity. What does that mean? but it all points to different ways of thinking, different ways of engaging around business, around entrepreneurship, that if we keep putting our foot forward in the best way and taking it on, we may be able to contribute to continue to build the healing centered paradigm in business, and may this episode contribute to the largest discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something really important that contributes to the different ways of approaching productivity is honoring cycles, like cycles of nature and cycles of our bodies. I mean, I know for me, like as a woman, there are literally weeks out of the month where I am more productive naturally and more creative, and there's weeks where like don't try to get me to speak in front of a group of people. It's not happening. And then there are the natural rhythms of our bodies and of nature, and we're just coming out of winter and heading into spring, and sometimes it can be it can feel like such an uphill battle when we're trying to be productive when it's not meant to be.
Yeah. And I think it'd be useful just to close out the conversation, just kind of naming some of the offerings that we're providing at the Acosta Institute in regards to healing centered business. We've had the kind of a half day business mastermind that brings entrepreneurs together for about 5 hours to think about really deeply around just problem solve, but also get some good healing centered practices around client journey and customer journey development, marketing, sales and operations, AI integration, and really just kind of thinking really robustly around what are some powerful offerings that can provide their clients. So there's that, the business mastermind. That's a half day retreat. We'll be doing some healing centered business planning workshops soon. We're also going to be designing a month-long healing centered business planning certificate program later on in the fall, which I'm excited about, and a lot of other different offerings that we want to put out there as far as healing centered business. So I'm excited about the work moving forward.